Wyoming Territory. Late spring of 1883, the wind howled over the Bighorn foothills as Marabeth Truin carried her feverish son through the pine-shadowed wilderness, each step pulling the last of her strength. "Just a little farther, Zane," she whispered, brushing damp hair from the boy's brow. He was 6. His breath came shallow, lips cracked. His skin burned hot against her chest as she held him close in the sling she had sewn from her last blanket. "You hold on for me, baby." The trail was barely a game path, winding between boulders and brush, the land thick with silence. Her boots were torn at the seams, skirt hem soaked from a stream they had crossed at dawn. She had not eaten in a day and a half. Her last apple had gone to Zane. She had been walking for 3 days. A week ago, their wagon had broken an axle outside of Cody. The man she had trusted to help them, her late husband's cousin, had taken the last mule, the food, and ridden off in the night while she and Zane slept under the stars. She had woken to emptiness and no sign of him. No water, no mercy. Zane had fallen ill the next day. Marabeth had no choice but to carry him. There was no town nearby, only a whisper of a ranch spoken of by a trapper weeks ago. She held on to that whisper like a prayer. By late afternoon, her knees buckled. She dropped to the damp ground by a creek, clutching Zane to her chest. "Please," she said aloud, voice rasped raw. "Please, I need help." Branches snapped nearby. She spun around, heart in her throat, arms tightening around her son. A man stepped from the trees, tall and steady, his rifle slung behind his shoulder, his eyes sharp and alert. He had dark hair tied back, a leather hat pushed low, and the kind of face shaped by weather and work, rough, quiet, watchful. "You lost?" he asked. Marabeth stood slowly, shielding Zane. "My son. He's burning up. We've been walking since Monday. He needs help." The man's gaze dropped to the boy, then back to her. "There's a cabin not far. I got clean water, some laudanum, and a dry bed. You can rest there." She hesitated. "I will not harm you," he said, firm but calm. "Name's Verren McKee, Cowboy. I run cattle east of here. You come with me or you keep walking. But that boy's not going to make another night like this." Marabeth looked down at Zane's flushed face. The boy whimpered, barely conscious. She nodded. Verren took the lead, cutting a path through the trees. He moved like he knew the land like breath, his steps sure, his pace measured for her. When she stumbled, he turned quickly and caught her by the arm. "Let me carry him," he said. "No," she breathed. "I can. You are about to fall over." "Let me help." She looked up at him. His eyes held no pity, only resolve. She gave a small nod. Verren stepped close and carefully lifted Zane from her arms. The boy's head lolled against his chest. "He is light," Verren said softly, and turned back toward the trees. The cabin was a simple structure tucked into the side of a hill, smoke curling from a stone chimney. Inside, it smelled of pine and old tobacco. He laid Zane on a cot near the hearth and stoked the fire higher. "Sit," he told her, pointing to a wooden chair near the hearth. "You have not eaten." "I do not need." He handed her a tin cup of stew anyway and set a clean cloth in a bowl of water before kneeling beside her son. "What are his symptoms?" she answered as best she could. Verren listened, then gave Zane a few drops of laudanum with a steady hand and wiped his face with the cool cloth. He worked with quiet care, focused and gentle. Marabeth watched him, the tension in her chest slowly easing. She had not known what to expect when she begged for help, but not this. Not a man like Verren. When Zane finally slept, Verren stood and poured her a second helping of stew. She hesitated. "You can trust me," he said, meeting her eyes. "I was raised to help a soul in need. That still means something." She took the bowl. Later, with Zane resting, she wandered outside. The sun was low, painting the hills gold. Verren stood near the horse corral, brushing down a chestnut mare. He glanced up when she stepped out. "You got far carrying him like that," he said. "I did not have a choice." He nodded. "You are stronger than most men I know." Marabeth folded her arms. "I was a miner's wife, then a widow. My boy is all I have." Verren studied her face. "You are not alone anymore." She blinked, not sure how to answer that. A silence fell between them, not empty, just full of things unspoken. He looked away first, giving the mare a final pat. "You can stay as long as you need." "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." When she turned to go back inside, he said, "Marabeth," she paused. "I am glad I found you." Her heart beat faster. That night, with Zane breathing easier beside her and the fire warm, she fell asleep for the first time in days. And Verren sat nearby, boots off, rifle across his lap, keeping watch, just in case, because something in him had already decided he would not let her or that boy suffer again. Not while he had breath to give. By morning, the storm in Zane's small body had eased. He still lay quiet, but his breathing had steadied, and his skin no longer burned like iron left in the sun. Marabeth sat beside him, eyes hollow with exhaustion but steadied by the change. She didn't touch the bread Verren left on the table until he returned from tending the stock, brushing snowmelt from his sleeves. "He's cooler," she said. "I could tell," Verren replied, setting down a pail of water near the hearth. "You looked different when I walked in. Less like you were bracing for bad news." Marabeth tore a piece of crust and chewed slowly. "He hasn't moved much, but he isn't fighting to breathe anymore. That's the medicine working. And the rest?" She nodded, gaze drifting to the small window above the cot. "Where does the trail from here lead?" "East, through the pass. But it won't open clean till late June. Snow sticks thick up there." He poured water into a tin basin and reached for a bar of lye soap. "Where were you headed?" "Fort Washakie. I've a cousin there." "She married a man with a freighting line. I rode ahead, but we left too late in the season." She wiped her hands on her skirt. "The man who drove us west said he knew the roads. He didn't." Verren scrubbed his hands clean. "Most men who talk too much about what they know usually don't know much." She watched him rinse, then dry his hands on a cloth hung near the stove. "You live here alone, for 3 years now. No wife." He looked at her, his face unreadable for a beat too long. "Then, there was someone. But it didn't hold." He turned to the fire and added a split log. "She left before the first winter." Marabeth folded her hands and stared at the floorboards. "You kept the fire anyway." "I built the place for myself. I don't need someone else here to keep it warm." She didn't answer. The only sound was the soft pop of sap in the flames and Zane's even breath. Later, Verren stepped out to split wood, and she took the chance to wash Zane's face again. His eyelashes fluttered, and he murmured something she couldn't catch. She leaned close. "Ma," he whispered, eyes squinting open, dazed. "I'm right here," she said softly, pressing her lips to his temple. "You're safe now." He turned his face into her neck, and she held him until his breathing deepened again. That evening, Verren brought in a handful of wild onions and a brace of grouse. Marabeth cleaned the birds without being asked. Her hands moved with practiced ease, and he didn't interrupt her rhythm. "You've done this before," he said, placing the onions in a tin bowl. "My husband mined silver outside of Virginia City. Camps don't feed themselves." He nodded and started chopping. "You cook better than I do." "You haven't tasted anything yet." He smiled then. Not wide, but enough to crease the corner of his eyes. Something in her chest settled. As they ate, Zane stirred and sat up slowly, blinking at the lamplight. Marabeth moved to his side and spooned broth into his mouth, her hand steady. Verren watched the boy eat. "He's strong. He gets that from his father." Verren didn't speak again until the bowl was empty. "You could stay through the thaw. I've got supplies enough. You can write your cousin again when the mail wagon starts running." I can't take charity. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. It's not charity. It's a roof and a fire until the world stops trying to kill you. Marabeth met his gaze. And what do you expect in return? Nothing you're not already giving, he said. Zane let out a soft sigh and leaned against her. She smoothed back his hair, heart caught between relief and something she couldn't name yet. Outside, night settled full. The wind had stilled. Verren stood and began clearing dishes. I'll sleep in the shed. There's a cot. You and Zane take the bed. I won't have you out in the cold for our sake. You already have. He gathered the tin plates, voice quiet. You walked through it. She didn't argue after that. When the lantern was turned low and Zane curled against her side, she lay awake a long time listening to the sound of Verren moving about outside the cabin. She imagined his boots tracking snow across the shed floor, the creak of old wood beneath him as he laid down. She thought of the way he had looked at her over his bowl, cautious but present. Marabeth closed her eyes. She didn't know what lay beyond the mountains or what kind of life waited in Fort Washakie. But in that moment, with Zane safe and warmth filling the small room, she knew one thing with certainty. She was not alone anymore. The snow didn't last. By mid-morning, it had melted down to wet patches in the shade of the trees, and the ground steamed faintly where the sun touched it. Zane sat in the doorway wrapped in a worn quilt, watching Verren mend a broken fence rail with a steady rhythm of hammer and nail. His eyes followed each motion, quiet but alert. Marabeth knelt beside the stream behind the cabin, rinsing ash from the stew pot. Her hands worked clean and quick, and her thoughts wandered to the letter she'd begun drafting in her head, how she'd explain the delay to her cousin, what she'd say about the man who had guided them halfway and then vanished. She didn't know how to shape those words yet. The wind carried the scent of pine pitch and damp soil. She stood and wiped her hands on her skirt, then lifted the pot and made her way back to the cabin. Zane looked up as she passed, and she ran a hand through his curls. He said I could help feed the hens tomorrow, Zane said. If I'm stronger. You'll be stronger, she said, but only if you rest today. Verren wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and set the hammer down. He's already bossed me twice about how many nails I'm using. Zane grinned, pale but pleased with himself. Marabeth opened the cabin door and stepped inside, setting the pot on the table. The quiet inside struck her differently now, less like a void and more like a place that held space for her. She began rewrapping a bundle of dried beans, folding the cloth tighter. When Verren came in, he paused in the doorway, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. His shirt clung to his back where sweat had darkened the fabric, and his hair had come loose from its tie. You can leave the repairs, she said. You've already done more than enough. He looked toward the hearth, then back at her. I don't do well sitting still. She folded the cloth and placed it on the shelf. Neither do I, but I've had to learn. Verren crossed to the wash basin and splashed water over his face. You ever think about settling somewhere, not just passing through? She turned slightly, caught by the question. That's hard to do when you don't know if you'll be welcome. You're welcome here. She leaned a hand on the table. Verren, I don't know what kind of life this is for you. But I've never had anything that lasted. Not since I was 16. I've always been someone's burden or someone's obligation. He dried his face with a towel and set it down slow. You're neither. Zane coughed from the doorway, and she moved to him, kneeling to feel his forehead with the back of her hand. A little warm, but nothing like before. She kissed his temple and looked up to find Verren watching them. You think the trail to Washakie's worth it? He asked, voice low. She rose, lifting Zane in her arms. It's the only plan I've got. That doesn't mean it's the best one. She waited. He stepped closer, resting a hand on the edge of the table. I run cattle up through the bighorns come July. There's a valley east of here where the grass grows thick and the water's clean. I built a bunkhouse there last fall. One man can't keep it all working. What are you asking? I'm not asking anything yet. I'm just saying there's room. And I wouldn't mind company that knows how to clean a grouse without wasting meat. Her mouth twitched into something close to a smile. Is that your way of offering me a job? It's my way of saying I see something good here. And maybe you do too. Zane yawned against her shoulder. She shifted his weight and looked out the window, toward the trees that climbed the ridgeline like quiet sentinels. I need time, she said. You've got it. He didn't press. Just nodded once and went back outside, the screen door creaking behind him. That night, Marabeth laid Zane down beneath the quilt and sat beside him, brushing his hair back from his brow. He slept without turning, his breaths deep and even. She listened to the distant sound of Verren's footsteps in the shed, the faint clink of metal as he hung his gear. She rested her hand on the quilt, fingers curled slightly. There had been a moment that morning while watching Zane and Verren exchange quiet words over the fence rail, when something had settled in her chest, not relief, not even hope, just a stillness she hadn't known in years. The boy was healing, and maybe, just maybe, she was too. The creek had begun to run clearer since the last thaw, fed by the mountains beyond. Marabeth knelt beside it with a pair of Verren's worn trousers, scrubbing at a patch of dried sap. The cold bit into her knuckles, but she didn't mind it. It grounded her, gave her something to do besides think too far ahead. Behind her, Zane's laughter lifted faint and sharp as a jay's cry. Verren had rigged a swing between two cottonwoods using an old length of rope and a plank seat. The boy clung to it now, legs kicking, cheeks flushed with color that had been absent for too long. He's getting steadier, Verren said, stepping around the stump where he'd been splitting kindling. Marabeth wrung out the cloth slow and firm. He hasn't coughed since dawn. That's the longest stretch yet. Verren crouched beside her and dipped his hands in the water without speaking. She watched as he rubbed them together, then shook them dry and let the wind finish the rest. You were up early, she said. Had to ride out to check the salt lick. Elk tore through the lower fence again. Left tracks all along the ridge. You track elk. I track anything that comes too close to my herd. She passed him the trousers. You ever think about leaving this place? He folded the fabric, not looking up. I tried once. Went south to Cheyenne. Didn't last 2 weeks. Too many voices, too many walls. You don't strike me as someone afraid of noise. I'm not. I just don't need it. Zane let out a whoop as the swing arced forward and they both turned to watch him. He was brighter in this light, limbs looser. His face open with joy that had been locked up since before they'd left Montana. Verren rose and walked over, catching the swing back with a rough hand. You hold tight, little man. That rope's older than I care to admit. I'm not scared, Zane said, gripping harder. Marabeth stood and brushed her hands clean on her apron. He's not. He never was. Verren glanced at her, then back at the boy. Neither are you, she didn't answer. The sun was climbing higher, and the air smelled faintly of fir needles and damp soil later, as Zane napped on a quilt in the grass. Marabeth set a tin cup of coffee beside Verren, who was carving a notch into a fence rail. His knife moved slow and sure, whittling down the edge. Your hands are steady, she said. Years of quiet'll teach a man to focus. She sat on the edge of the porch, her skirt brushing the wood. You ever miss having someone to share it with? The knife paused. Sometimes, but most folks I've known never made it easy. I wouldn't, she said. Make it easy, I mean. I didn't ask you to. She drew her knees up, watching a hawk circle overhead. I don't know how to be with someone who doesn't want to fix me. I'm not looking to fix anything. I'm not even sure what's broken. She looked at him then, eyes sharp beneath the brim of her borrowed hat. I lost a husband to a cave-in. I lost my place in Virginia City to debt. I lost the trust of folks who couldn't understand why a woman wouldn't just stay put and remarry. Verren set the knife down. You didn't lose anything that wasn't worth walking away from. He said it plain, without weight or angle, and it settled into her like a stone in still water. Zane stirred in his sleep, turning toward the sun. Marabeth rose and stepped lightly over to him, kneeling to adjust the quilt. When she looked back, Verren was still watching her. "Come July," he said, "there's branding to do and calves to wean. It's hard work, long days. Could use another set of hands that knows what grit means. You offering me wages. I'm offering you the truth of what this life is. You can take whatever you want from it." She sat back on her heels. "And if I stay past July, then we'll figure out what comes after." Together, the wind shifted and the trees whispered high above. Zane slept on, the quiet around him deep and whole. Marabeth stood, brushing pine needles from her skirt. She looked toward the mountains, then back at the man before her. "I'll give it until the first frost," she said. "Then we'll see." Verren nodded, reaching for the knife again. "That's fair." Neither of them smiled. They didn't need to. The air between them had changed, not with promises, but with the shape of something real taking root. They would tend to it slowly, like the soil after a long freeze, turning it gently, giving it breath, letting it grow. The first branding day came with the scent of singed hair carried on the wind and a sky washed pale with heat. The herd had been driven down from the upper pasture at dawn, and by midday, the corrals rang with lowing calves and the shuffle of boots in dust. Marabeth stood just outside the pen, a leather apron tied over her skirt, Zane resting in the shade nearby with a shallow pan of buttermilk and a worn book borrowed from Verren's small shelf. Verren worked inside the corral, roping and dragging the calves to the branding crew, his shoulders taut beneath the weight of each pull. His shirt sleeves were rolled, hands gloved, a streak of soot across his jaw. He moved without wasted motion, focused and wordless, until a calf broke from the group and bolted toward the far gate. Marabeth didn't hesitate. She stepped into the pen and cut the animal off clean, arms spread as she turned it with a sharp clap and low hiss. The calf stumbled back toward the group, and she reached for the rope Verren tossed her without looking. "Good turn," he said, catching her eye as she passed the line around a post. "I've turned worse," she replied, breath short, hair clinging to her forehead. They didn't speak again until the last calf was marked and the fire banked low. The hired hands washed off at the stream and set off toward the bunkhouse for supper, their voices fading. Marabeth leaned against the rail, wiping her hands clean with a cloth dampened from the pump. Verren stood beside her, arms crossed, watching the herd settle. "You handled yourself like someone born to it," he said. "My father bred mules in the Bitterroots before he took up mining. I was gentling colts by the time I could reach a bridle." He nodded once, slow. "I figured something old in the way you moved." She looked down at her palms. "I thought I'd forgotten all of it. Turns out I just hadn't been asked." Verren didn't answer, but his gaze lingered longer than it had before. That night, after Zane had fallen asleep with his head on a folded towel and a candle burned low beside the book, Marabeth stepped out into the yard. The stars above were thick as pollen in spring, and the half-moon painted the edge of the barn white. Verren was there, leaning against the post where the porch met the yard. He didn't speak as she approached, only shifted enough to make room at his side. "I wrote my cousin," she said. "Told her I won't be coming." He turned his head slightly, not surprised. "That what you want?" "I didn't know until I said it aloud." They stood like that for a while, the night warm around them. "I've been thinking about building another room onto the cabin," Verren said. She glanced at him. For what? Storage or sleep? Or whatever comes. Marabeth narrowed her eyes. You offering me a roof or something else? I'm offering you a life. One built slow. One that doesn't ask anything you haven't already given. She folded her arms, but her voice softened. I've never been asked. I'm asking now. She looked toward the dark line of the tree line, then back at the man beside her, his face lined with dirt and sweat, and something quieter than hope, something steadier. I want that life, she said. I want it with you. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers curling around hers without hesitation. They stayed there until the chill crept into the air and the stars wheeled higher, and when they went inside, they did so together. By the time the leaves turned gold and the calves weaned clean, the second room was half built, and Verren had carved their names into the doorframe above the cabin. Zane had grown strong enough to ride a pony up the creek path alone, and Marabeth kept a jar of dried apples on the shelf beside the flour bin, her hands always busy, her eyes settled in a way they never had been before. When winter set in, they gathered by the hearth each evening, Zane curled with his books, Verren carving new handles for the tools, Marabeth patching his shirts with neat stitches done by firelight. She wore a simple band he'd carved from antler, and he wore one of plaited leather she'd braided herself. No ceremony. No preacher. Just a promise made beneath the cottonwoods, plain and binding. Verren made no speeches. He didn't need them. He brought her coffee before she asked, checked the door latches twice when the wind rose, and every morning he kissed her brow before stepping outside, boots crunching over frost. And when she laughed, which she did now, often it was a sound that belonged, not borrowed or rare. They built a life in pieces, not all at once, but with each choice made in the quiet hours, the swing rope replaced, the fence mended again, the pot of beans left simmering when she knew he'd be late. Zane grew tall, learned to fish the deep pools beneath the rocks and gentle a calf without raising his voice. He called Verren Pa without being told to, and Verren never corrected him. They never left the cabin, never needed to. The world beyond the ridge kept spinning, but their piece of it held steady. And inside that steadiness, a woman who had once walked through the wilderness with her child in her arms found not just rest, but a home that asked nothing more than what she already was. And a man who once thought silence was safety found his voice in the shape of her name, said soft and certain in the dark,